So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of diversity because I don't know about you, but if you ask 100 people what diversity is, you'll get 100 answers. Right? And so when we talk about diversity, we often talk about the emotional response to diversity, or we talk about how it makes us feel or not feel, how we're included or left out. And so I have a problem with this concept of diversity as it's been played out in the past. And I want to thank my foreparents. I want to thank for those men and women who fought for my right to vote and my right to shop anywhere that I want. But we need a new paradigm for diversity. And so part of that new paradigm of diversity requires us to look at those old concepts. And so if I ask 100 people, I would get 100 answers. And if I'm a teacher and I give a test to a group of students, and each one of my students gives me a different answer, then the problem isn't with the students, the problem is with me. And so if people can give us different definitions of what diversity is, it's obvious that as teachers, as people who have worked with these concepts, that we haven't necessarily done a good job, or that it's changed in such a way that we really can't identify what it is in an articulate manner that we're trying to work on. And so I want to talk about this concept of diversity, but I want to talk first about what diversity is not. Diversity, again, is not political correctness. We did a really good job in the 1980s and 1990s trying to get people to not say stupid stuff. However, political correctness has gotten so obtuse, has gotten so far from our original goal that it has actually become a joke. It's a joke because a janitor is no longer a janitor. They are a custodial engineer. Now, I understand that we want and need to, create professionalism in our spheres of influence, and that makes sense. But when I can't have a conversation about a person in my office, or I don't know what the correct term is, then it's become pretty complicated and not very useful in helping me to communicate. So diversity is not about political correctness. It's also not about black and white. And when I talk about black and white, I mean not just the racial construct that we've invented, but also the metaphor of being absolutes, that it's about being absolutely correct or absolutely wrong. And so what I would say is that diversity is about that gray area that we try to find how we can connect and work with one another. Diversity is also not about blame, fault, or guilt. Oftentimes, when people have the conversations about diversity, they are moved either by blame or shame or fault or guilt. And so I ask this question, does your car have blind spots? And typically the answer is yes, that your car does have blind spots. And it's typically, to your left and right over your shoulders. Sometimes it's in the back. You have blind spots all over the place. And are those blind spots your fault? And my answer to that would also be no, it's not your fault. However, it is your responsibility. And so although we did not create the situations that we're in, we did not create the problems, we didn't create racism or sexism, but we did inherit that as something that has become our responsibility to do something about. And so diversity is not about it's not about political correctness. It's not about black and white. It's not about blame, fault, or guilt. And it's not therapy. A lot of times people get into diversity trainings, they get into diversity discussions, and the trainers themselves tout themselves as being, professional therapists, and that it wasn't an effective session unless I was able to get someone to cry, or if someone wasn't able to express their all of their, emotional baggage in the session. And so I would say that diversity training is not about therapy. And it's also not about meritocracy. And meritocracy is the concept that if you work hard enough, you can be just like me. Now, what's the problem with meritocracy? Well, on its surface, it sounds like a really good idea, that if everyone just worked and did their part, we could all share in the same bounty. But the truth of the matter is this, that we don't all start off the same, and we have different abilities and different things that we're responsible for. So, working hard enough is not always the answer. Some of the hardest working people that I know are poor people. And some of the folks that don't work so hard are people of means or with wealth. And so meritocracy is not the answer. So what is the answer? The answer is very simple, that diversity is not about black and white. It is not about, political correctness. It's not about blame, fault, and guilt. And lastly, diversity is not about tolerance. Now, when I say diversity is not about tolerance, people get really nervous because there are websites, there are museums dedicated, there are books. We've taught our kids about tolerance, and so we expect that they will be tolerant. But what we fail to realize is that tolerance means to put up with something. Right? And so I tell this joke, and it is truly a joke, that my brother-in-law comes to visit with his family, and with my sister and their kids, and I tolerate that dude. And why do I tolerate them? And typically, people come up with the answers that you tolerate him because you love your sister. You tolerate him because you love your nieces and nephews because he's your brother-in-law and all that. And I want to tell you the truth about that joke, which is that I tolerate my brother-in-law, or I tolerate people in my life because I know when they will leave. I know when they'll leave. Right? And so when we talk about tolerance, what we suggest on a subconscious level is that I will put up with this group of immigrants. I will put up with this with these women. I will put up with these various situations because I know ultimately they will leave. But I have to say, folks, if we look at our culture and we look at our communities, are our communities getting less diverse? Are our human relations getting less complicated? And my answer would be no.